Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
So we have details of a Conservative policy this morning. We're expecting a speech from Theresa May in the next hour. And Jeremy Corbyn has been speaking in Manchester, where the party are officially launching their campaign. Let's talk to two seasoned political journalists who are out on the campaign. Lucy Fisher of The Times, who's at the Labour event in Manchester, and the Mail's Jason Groves, who's here in Westminster. Welcome to both of you. Jason, what do you make of Theresa May's more presidential style and rhetoric on this campaign?
Well, it's quite noticeable, isn't it? I mean, I think these elections are always quite presidential, and I guess when you're 40 points ahead of your rival in the stakes for who would make the best Prime Minister, it's inevitable. But it is very striking that she's talking about not voting for the Conservatives. She's talking for me and my team. The banners don't say Conservative, they say Theresa May. I think it's a consequence of the fact that in some parts of the country, there's still a bit of a taboo about voting Labour. Now, we saw that break down a little bit in the local elections last week, but I think this strategy is aimed at making that a little bit easier for people. And it's quite marked contrast to the Labour campaign, where we're struggling to find any Labour MPs who put Mr Corbyn on their leaflets at all. Right.
Well, certainly we've just shown a picture there of Theresa May, and as you say, against a blue backdrop, but very much about her, talking about my candidates, working for me rhetoric. Lucy Fisher, what do you make of the policy announced today about a cap on energy prices? It's been talked about before. It does sound remarkably like Ed Miliband's freeze.
That's absolutely right, and in a way I think it's unsurprising to see quite a lot of Labour people quite angry today, given the amount of bile that was thrown at Ed Miliband back in 2013 when he unveiled this policy. David Cameron said back then that he was living in a Marxist universe for suggesting such a proposal. Other Labour people today are pointing out that this policy, their policy, differed from the current Conservative policy, only in that they suggested a price freeze, so they said that there was better protection for consumers not to see bills go up. But it's very interesting. This is obviously Theresa May talking about helping the just about managing classes, the very people she said she wanted to help when she first arrived on the steps of Downing Street. She is sort of moving into that central ground as Labour lurches to the left, and it really is quite clever politics.
Well, let's listen to Greg Clark, the Energy Secretary, trying to explain and justify why they have brought in this policy.
That was it was a botched policy. As you say, they talked about a freeze. I think they even advertised it in a block of ice. And what happened after that was that the wholesale price of gas and electricity fell. And so if it had been introduced, then people would have paid more than needed. I think we've got a duty to act. So we're going to bring in a cap for those default tariffs so people can't be overcharged in the way that they are at the moment.
Well, Jason Groves, your paper was extremely critical of Ed Miliband at the time, referring, as Lucy Fisher said, to a Marxist policy, Red Ed. Are they changing their tune?
Well, to a certain extent. I mean, I think there is a difference. When Miliband announced his policy at first, it was a freeze. And I think there are a lot of Tories who will still be a bit queasy about the idea of the state intervening quite so hard. The flip side of that is it was also a very popular policy. And I think Theresa May and those around her have reached the point where they've just given up on the energy companies ever doing the decent thing on their own. And I think they feel that for now at least, they've got to do something to help people who are struggling with their bills.
Lucy Fisher, you're there in Manchester. You've obviously heard Jeremy Corbyn give that speech launching their campaign. What did you think? A lot of talk about a rigged democracy only for those who are rich enough to be able to afford it.
Yes, I mean, again, this is straight out of the 2015 Ed Miliband playbook. He's getting a lot of talk to the former Labour leader. Yes, Jeremy Corbyn really went after bankers, the corporates. There was a noticeably more aggressive tone. He talked about a reckoning with the rich and the powerful. He urged his backers to ruin the Conservatives in 4 weeks' time. But interesting, I detected a few, sort of getting in a few excuses early today. He talked about a Tory spin machine that meant that some voters would settle for less or resign themselves to the status quo. Ian Lavery, the Labour elections campaign chief who introduced Jeremy Corbyn, also sort of made oblique warnings perhaps to the concept of defeat on June the 8th, talking about supporters dusting themselves down if they find themselves down and getting on with the fight. So interesting, not as much confidence in the room here as I was perhaps expecting.
Thank you to both of you. Your reaction to that speech, it was all about trying to take back wealth. Have we got the policies yet, though, from Jeremy Corbyn and his team about how they would actually achieve that?
Well, the manifesto obviously comes out next week, but yes, we do have that beginning, I think. I think the choice they're trying to make is between obviously a Conservative government, which over the last few years we've had the longest squeeze in wages for many generations, and a Labour government that would say, we'll put money into people's pockets, a £10 living wage, for example, invest in the economy. A Conservative government which has given tax cuts to big businesses who've boomed like never before over the last few years, whilst the Labour vision, which they're trying to put across, which is let's stand up for self-employed people, the plucky entrepreneurs, the small businesses who suffer, for example, because they don't get those late payments, for example, from big businesses. Equally, our public services, obviously they've suffered terrible cuts over the last few years, and that Labour message is, well, come on. The rich are doing pretty well in this country at the moment. Let's use some of that wealth to invest in our creaking public services.
So you must be very disappointed with the fact that John McDonnell is only talking about a very modest tax increase on those earning over £80,000. That is not going to bring in anything like the amount of money or bring that day of reckoning that Jeremy Corbyn's talking about.
Well, they're talking, for example, about reversing some of the cuts to corporation tax. We don't
yet know, of course, what level that is or the money that would bring back to the Exchequer.
Well, that's what I mean. Partly this discussion, you know, we're going to struggle a bit there because we haven't had the manifesto of any party yet, so we're just kind of speculating. But, you know, that message that Labour are putting across, which is they're going to be the low tax party for 95% of people. 95% of your viewers are not going to pay more taxes. Their point is the Tories are the low tax party for the rich, and that's the balance they're trying to focus on.
They haven't been clear, of course, on national insurance contributions for employers, for example, or on all the rates of VAT.
John McDonnell said they were going to increase those, as far as I know.
On the employers,
yeah.
Not employees. I hadn't heard that, actually. I thought he'd only said on employees and hadn't ruled out on
they
NICs
said they had
on
no
employees.
plans to do so.
No plans. Well, that's not quite the same as you know in political speak, and the same thing goes with VAT on things like energy, for example. But if you look at the Conservatives, for example, do you think this is wholesale stealing of Ed Miliband's policy?
Cheeky scamps is what I thought, honestly. I think what Labour have to ram home here, because, you know, they were talking about at the last election that kind of policy, Soviet communism will nationalise your mothers at this rate. But if it's OK, this is the point I think Labour need to make. If, after all, they were vindicated in that argument and they were right, that the government should intervene when markets are failing, why not extend that principle? Why not extend it, for example, to the housing market, the lowest level of house building in peacetime since the 20s, market failure? Why not extend it to the rail companies who
as
failed?
You say, we haven't had the manifestos yet,
no.
So we don't quite know what they're going to say.
But is
it? I take your point. Is it also an attempt by Theresa May to occupy ground that's been vacated by Labour? She's able to move to the left and at the same time come up with what you might call protectionist policies, restating the immigration pledge. Of course, this cap on energy prices because it appeals to UKIP supporters.
Well, I think there's a recognition that the majority of people in this country are fed up of living in a country which is rigged in favour of a very small number of people, where we've seen a surge in the number of billionaires over the last year.
So why did the Conservatives do so well in these local elections?
The point is they're trying to tap into that sentiment. Look, we know about Labour's failings, and with all due respect, you're going to have no shortage of pundits in your studios sticking it to the opposition and trying to redress the balance a bit here. And the point I'd make is there is that mood in the country which even the Conservative Party recognise. The point I would make on that, though, is can you trust Theresa May to deliver, given her broken promises and everything from a snap election, immigration targets, she keeps saying tens of thousands, she said that for years. For example, on national insurance, we had 2 U-turns on that.
Well,
I think that Labour need to hammer is you can't trust the word Theresa May says. So even when she starts nicking the occasional Labour policy, can you trust her to implement it? But crucially, if we were right about that, those of us on the left who argued the state should intervene in the market, Why not extend that principle elsewhere where the market is also failing?
All right, well, let's continue along this thread because, as we've been saying, Jeremy Corbyn has been launching Labour's election campaign in the City region, where the party, in the form of Andy Burnham, has just won the mayoralty. Jeremy Corbyn told his audience, which this time included Mr Burnham, in fact, he joined Mr Corbyn on stage, that under Labour there will be no going back on last year's EU referendum. That the issue is settled. But he warned that if the Conservatives won, Brexit would be hijacked by the elites to pay even less tax.
Don't wake up on the 9th of June to see celebrations from the tax cheats, the press barons, the greedy bankers, Philip Green, the Southern Rail directors and crooked financiers that take our wealth and have got away with it because they are the party they own. That is, the Conservative Party would have won. We have 4 weeks to ruin their party. We have 4 weeks to have a chance to take our wealth back.
Jeremy Corbyn there. Well, Labour's Sarah Champion was at that launch in Manchester too. Welcome to the programme, Sarah. Jeremy Corbyn said when Labour wins, there will be a reckoning for those who thought they could get away with asset stripping our industry, crashing our economy through their greed and ripping off workers and consumers. Are you talking about introducing wealth taxes?
What we're talking about is actually listening to what people are saying. They feel a complete disconnect between what's happening down in Westminster and what's happening on their doorstep. In Rotherham, people are getting poorer, they are feeling less listened to, they are feeling unsupported, and it's about getting a reckoning so that everybody can reach their potential.
Sure,
That's
and
what
I'm
we're
asking
talking
about how you get to that reckoning. I understand and hear what you're saying, but when Jeremy Corbyn says there will be a reckoning for those people, how does he intend to do it? Does he intend to do it by introducing specific wealth taxes?
Well, I'm going to have to give the standard line, which is the manifesto won't be out for a week and all the details will be in that. What I know that he's very clear about is that the very, very top will be paying more, that corporations will be paying their fair share, that we won't be seeing money going out of the country when it's British workers that have invested in it, that we're looking for everybody to reach their potential. And that means getting a fair wage, that means having a fair infrastructure, for example, education, our NHS, our social care.
Right. I mean, a little bit more tax on the top 5% of earners is hardly a radical platform, and it's certainly not going to achieve the rhetoric that I've just read out to you.
I don't think that what we're looking for is radical. I think what we're looking for is trying to understand what the bigger picture is, how people in this country are feeling, and really transforming the message that we've got. What I don't want and what the people I represent don't want is the same old politics, the same old language just being reglossed so that people can just get back into their seats. What they're looking for is people that will actually deliver real change to this country. So maybe that is radical. I think it's actually just common sense, and that's what we're really going to try and achieve.
Right. Well, I mean, I think the rhetoric does sound quite radical. Jeremy Corbyn does talk about an anti-establishment transformative manifesto that I understand we haven't quite got yet, that Jeremy Corbyn says his leadership is going to herald. But so far, I am struggling to see where the policies, albeit before the manifesto, because Labour has actually talked about some of their policies, and, you know, taxing the top 5% of earners a little bit more isn't going to do it.
Well, you're talking about radical, I'm talking about common sense. What we're actually looking at is within the existing budget that we've got, dividing it up more fairly so that everybody can benefit, rather than seeing money going into the pockets of a certain few, seeing everybody reach their full potential. So what I'm hearing on the doorstep is that people are working as hard as they possibly can, but they feel that they're being demonised. That's not right. We're the 6th wealthiest country. We need to be sharing that wealth out more equally.
So who are you going to take the money away from?
Well, as I've just said, partly it's about how you divide up that money. So we have a fixed pot that we're looking at, and it's where do we make those investments.
But Sarah Champion, Jeremy
Corbyn
has talked specifically about those greedy people who have crashed the economy and who are ripping off workers and consumers. Who are you talking about? Who are you going to take the money away from and redistribute it?
Let me give you one very concrete example. Close to me there are a number of care homes, and the person that owns those care homes has got richer and richer and richer. The local authorities are finding it very difficult to pay the charges that he's making. The workers are finding it incredibly difficult on the minimum wage that they're getting to make a living. They're having to do 2 jobs just to be able to keep their head above water.
So will you nationalise care homes?
So that doesn't seem fair to me. What I see... Say again?
Will you nationalise the care homes then?
Sorry?
Will you nationalise care homes?
What I'm looking at is seeing that when there is a business, that everybody that makes that business successful is able to benefit from that, rather than just the people at the very top. So of course we want businesses to flourish. That's how the whole economy flourishes. But we do need to see that trickle down, because otherwise how exactly are we going to become the society that we all want to be? You know, I don't want to see people sleeping on the streets. I don't want to see people going to food banks. It doesn't have to be like this. So maybe I'm going back on myself. Maybe it is radical, but I still think it's common sense to try and create an economy where everybody can benefit, and that's what Labour wants to do.
So you must welcome then Theresa May and the Tories' announcement. They seem to be adopting Ed Miliband's policy of intervening in the energy markets.
It's quite interesting, isn't it? Because she sort of lurches from the far right to becoming a red Tory. So what we were looking at when we proposed it was, yes, putting a freeze on the top, but we were also looking at changing the structure, giving the regulating bodies more powers so that people aren't being exploited. So, you know, if she wants to nick some of our policies, then good luck to her. What I want to see is benefits for the whole country.
Jeremy Corbyn talked about the NHS and about private contractors. Would you like to see every private contract in the NHS in England scrapped if Labour is elected?
What I want to see is the best NHS we can possibly get.
Sure, I think everyone would agree with you on that.
Well, I can answer the question if you'd like me to.
Yeah, go on.
What I would like to see is a situation where, for example, when there are voluntary partnerships with charities, with community groups, that works really well. So, for example, we had that in probation until that was all privatised. So there are situations where charities could be working alongside the NHS, but what I'm looking for again in the NHS is for us to see how we can provide a comprehensive service rather than the postcode lottery that we've got at the moment. So that is about sharing expertise, but it's also about very practical things. For example, on procurement, if we were procuring things at a national level rather than each individual hospital having to do it itself, that would save billions and billions for this country.
Right, OK, but no extra money then going into the NHS over and above what's been promised?
We're very clear. I mean, again, I have to fall back on it'll all be in the manifesto, but we're very clear that we will fund the NHS so that it's able to be the service that we all expect it to be. That also means making sure that we've got proper staffing in place. And one of the things, if we get staff that feel secure, that are being properly paid and properly looked after, we wouldn't be so reliant on the agency staff, which at the moment is costing us an absolute fortune. And the reason that staff are going over to agency working is because they're just not finding that they're getting the support that they need when they're being demonised by Jeremy Hunt on a daily basis.
Let's talk very briefly about Brexit, because Jeremy Corbyn says Brexit is settled. What does that mean?
I think that what he means is that Theresa May is trying to make this just a straight Brexit negotiation. If she actually cared that much about Brexit, then she would have been fighting for the best interest of the British party, of the British public now, rather than calling an election which effectively freezes everything for 2 months. So what we're looking at is, yes, of course, Brexit, but we want the best deal for everyone. But we're also looking at the broader picture that on a day-to-day basis, for, you know, from day one going forwards, benefits people. So that is why we're talking about the NHS. That is why we're talking about jobs. That is why we're talking about education. Because this isn't an election on how do we want Brexit. We've decided, you know, we are coming out of Europe. We're very clear on that. What this election is about is, do you feel better off under the Tories, or do you think there's actually a better way that we can all benefit from?
Sarah Champion in Manchester, thank you very much. If you were watching yesterday, you'll be aware that we've embarked on the epic logistical exercise of deploying Adam with his mood box to prey on unsuspecting members of the public across the length and breadth of the UK. Well, today he's taken his balls to Derby. Adam. You're back. Adam.
Hello, Joe.
Hello.
Welcome to Derby. Welcome to Derby, Joe. Now, one of the constituencies here Interesting, because it was won by the Conservatives at the last election by just 41 votes. Now, what does that look like? Here are some students and staff from Derby College. How tight it was. Excellent work, everyone. Thank you very much. Now, the Labour candidate this time is a self-proclaimed Corbynista. So we took and asked people whether Jeremy Corbyn made them more or less likely to vote Labour. Here's how it went.
I think we're spending too much money on war.
Okay. And so you quite like his peacemaking credentials?
Yeah, I think he's a legend.
There you go. When I say the name Jeremy Corbyn, what's the first word that pops into your head?
Idiot. The man's an idiot.
He's an idiot. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
What do you think? Will he make you more or less likely to vote Labour on the 8th of June?
Less.
How much less?
90%.
90% less, okay.
Too left wing.
Too left wing for you.
Too control of the unions, and no matter what he says, he's that way inclined.
Well, at the moment, I just feel like Conservative's the best option, and I've never ever voted Conservative before, but I think I probably will this time.
Basically because of Jeremy Corbyn.
Yeah, yeah.
Unfortunately, I'll go against all my principles, but I'm voting Conservative.
But I'm a working class woman and all my family's working class, so I'm voting Jeremy Corbyn.
Okay.
He's a genius.
He's a genius. What's he done that's so genius?
I don't know, I just like his ethics.
I don't think he's got the charisma for the job myself, you know.
Okay. No worries, I'll go and put the ball in for you, shall I?
Yeah,
so you don't have to get out of the car. Okay,
Yeah.
Thanks. What do you think about Jeremy Corbyn? Oh, he just gave his answer in sound effect form.
David Cameron, always smart, tie.
Yeah.
Jeremy Corbyn looks like he's come out the back garden. I'm not saying I won't vote Labour, but that makes a big influence on people.
Right.
I'm sure it does.
I'm still a Labour person, but I'm not voting for someone who won't put bullets in our guns for our army.
I think that makes you a less person then.
So I'm going in there.
I think he's being misrepresented in the media.
Really? But we've just been standing here for about 2 hours just asking people, and that's just what people have said.
I know, it's such a shame.
So what's the unscientific verdict in this marginal constituency? It's that people are less likely to vote for Labour because of Jeremy Corbyn. Thank you very much, Derby North.
Adam there, and apologies for losing the picture there a bit earlier. And a full list of candidates standing in Derby North will be available when nominations close, and they are all on the website, the BBC website. Let's pick up on a few of those points, because there were a lot of Labour voters there who just said they wouldn't vote for the party because of Jeremy Corbyn. How does that make you feel?
Well, obviously, it's disappointing, it's frustrating. And I think, look, in the press, overwhelmingly, and as I've said at the beginning of the programme, you're going to hear pundits say, well, what they don't like about the Labour leadership and why they're supportive of the Conservative Party. So can I just give the alternative view?
I mean, the lady there said she feels that he's misrepresented. Is that what you're saying the media does? They actually misrepresent Jeremy Corbyn, or they just criticise him?
Inevitably, in this country, we have a press which overwhelmingly supports the Conservative Party, but it's almost like barking at weather. They're not going to stop being right-wing and aggressive. You need a strategy to deal with it. But what I would say, just the counter-argument to those voters, Theresa May has repeatedly made promises she's broken: early election, national insurance, immigration. And whatever you say about Jeremy Corbyn, he is a man of conviction who genuinely, passionately believes, and I think would lie awake at night as Prime Minister, worrying about the failure to build the housing that this country needs, about the lack of secure jobs, about the failure to invest in the future of young people. So if we're going to make a dividing line, which we don't often hear this said on national television, that's what I'd say. I think he is someone who isn't beholden to special interests, the sort of rich donors who fund the Conservative Party, but genuinely, passionately cares about the interests, needs and ambitions of most people in this country. And I do think that should count for something.
Right. Why doesn't it count? I mean, if the Labour Party was shouting those messages out, and they say they are, why is it not gaining any traction if there are people, as Jeremy Corbyn says, who agree with him and who are victims of the democracy that we live in currently? Why is Theresa May getting all the votes?
Well, I think Labour have 4 weeks to take that on. And, that's what, we're going to see the manifesto next week. But the argument they're making, Labour, and they've got to make it because we're not a presidential system. This is not the United States of America. It's un-British to make it about presidential
and she's made it, and she's made
Of
it
course
like that because she wants to
British.
take on Jeremy Corbyn.
But I think when it comes down to it, what Labour have to argue is, under the Conservative government, which we've had for the last few years, Britain's been held back, living standards have fallen, we've not invested in public services. A Labour government instead would stand up for the majority of people, working people. It would fund public services.
But Ed Miliband said all those things. I mean, if you look at the rhetoric of the 2015 general election and you look at the words that Jeremy Corbyn has spoken today, you put those two speeches together, they're almost identical. And Ed Miliband lost the 2015 election.
I'm not sure about that.
I mean, a lot of the rhetoric is rigging democracy, wanting to take back from the rich, helping the many, not the few.
There was a lack of a clear, distinct vision during the last general election. One of the things that's hobbled Labour for a very long time is the Tories have set the narrative on public spending. The Tories backed every single penny of Labour spending before the crash, but then argued the reason we're in the mess that we're in wasn't because of the city, because of public spending. So, just quickly, that's hobbled Labour a lot, because when it makes pledges to try and change society, even though they're fully costed, apparently the manifesto will be fully costed, it's difficult to get that argument across. But
although when we have spoken to Labour front benchers, they can't always cost the policy specifically, and that worries people.
That's what the manifesto is committed to doing. We will see, of course.
Yes.
But what Labour does have to make clear now, and this is what they're saying for the many, not the few, is people will have a choice between a Conservative Party, which does have a proven record of cutting taxes on the rich whilst presiding over squeezed wages for the majority, or a Labour government that says, look, the rich are doing well, let's use some of that money to invest in our public services, let's invest in the secure, skilled jobs of the future instead of the kind of hire and fire service sector jobs that so many people have. Let's build the housing people need. Let's deal with falling home ownership. And that is a tough ask. They're a plucky underdog in this, but sometimes Brits, they like a plucky underdog.
Do you accept that even if people like that message, the people there, of course it's unscientific in that mood box, they just don't like the messenger?
Well, I saw the same thing you did. I mean, obviously, I saw that. I know what the polling says, but I do think it should be more than personalities. It should be about policies. It should be about vision, and that's what this election should be about.
Well, we're moving on.
There's confusion tonight over exactly what Labour's policy is on Brexit. At an official launch of the Labour election campaign in Trafford, Jeremy Corbyn said the question of Brexit was settled. But speaking to our political editor Laura Koonsberg later, he repeatedly refused to say whether Labour would definitely take Britain out of the European Union.
Jeremy Corbyn!
A showbiz introduction. Labour's had more drama in 18 months than some parties do in a decade. But he is on the main stage now. So are you ready for his lines?
The economy is still rigged in favour of the rich and powerful. When Labour wins, there'll be a reckoning for those who thought they could get away with asset stripping our industry, crashing our economy through their greed and ripping off workers and consumers.
A dramatic call in front of his shiny new battle bus. But since he's been in charge, Labour has gone backwards.
We have 4 weeks to ruin their party. We have 4 weeks to have a chance to take our wealth back. We must seize that chance today and every day until June the 8th.
He's brought multitudes of new members, but what about the mainstream?
You said rather dramatically, there will be a reckoning if you become Prime Minister. Now, a reckoning doesn't sound like a few people at the very top paying a little bit more. It sounds like something rather more radical.
What it is,
much higher taxes for business.
It's a reckoning in our society that very big business should pay more in tax. Corporation tax should not be lowered, as the Conservatives proposed to give away more than 60 billion in tax cuts over the next 4 years.
How much more would you put on?
Well, you'll have to wait for the manifesto for the details. You're expecting that answer, I know.
When you use language like promising a reckoning, talking about people taking back their wealth, to some voters, to some of our viewers, that sounds like the politics of envy.
Not at all, not at all. What I'm saying is that we all benefit when we all do better. We are a very rich country, but unfortunately the riches are not very fairly spread around the place, and the levels of inequality are getting worse. We need to understand the anger that many people feel in this country. 6 million earning less than the living wage, 1 million on 0 hours contracts, many on short-term jobs and short-term working in communities that have seen precious little investment for 30 years, their anger is palpable and real.
And are you angry?
Yes. I do get angry about poverty, I get angry about injustice, I get angry about inequality.
Why do you believe that you can now win a general election from the left? Because the evidence so far under your leadership is that the kind of things that you've been saying, which go down like a storm in a room like this, but the evidence is in the wider electorate that the Labour Party has been going backwards.
All the evidence is, ask people the question on wages, ask people the question on housing, ask people the question on education, ask people the question on social care. Ask them all those questions, all of which are framed in our policies, and you find people saying, yeah, I agree with that.
That's what he wants to take on the road, with big promises to come. Voters in Salford Sunshine were curious.
I don't know if he is necessarily the individual, but certainly where he's coming from, I think really it resonates with so many people sort of up here and in other parts of the country.
There's that many people in the Labour Party hate him. Oh, I won't say hate him, but can't get on with him. I don't know, I don't think he's got much of a chance.
But it's been hard for Labour to settle on a position on leaving the EU. The leader wants to draw a line.
This election isn't about Brexit itself. That issue has been settled. The question now is what sort of Brexit do we want? And what sort of country do we want Britain to be after that?
His aides are adamant settled means settled. A Labour government would leave. But when I asked him several times, the answer was not quite so clear.
Does that mean if you're Prime Minister, come hell or high water, whatever the deal on the table, we will be leaving the European Union?
Look, there was a clear vote at the referendum a year ago, but there is now the negotiations which have already begun.
That's not quite my question. My question is, if you're Prime Minister, we will leave come hell or high water, whatever is on the table at the end of the negotiations.
We win the election, we'll get a good deal with Europe.
Can you categorically say that we would definitely leave? Because if you won't, there is a chink of a possibility that things could change and we might end up looking differently at our options.
The danger is of the approach the Conservatives are taking in their megaphone diplomacy with Europe. Our view is you have to talk to them, negotiate with them, and recognise there is actually quite a lot of common interest, particularly in manufacturing industry. That is the process we're following.
But for all the leaders in this merry dance, every word, every move does matter. Laura Kunsberg, BBC News, Trafford.
It might already appear well underway, but today Jeremy Corbyn officially launched Labour's election campaign. At a rally in Manchester, Mr Corbyn said if he won, there would be a reckoning for tax cheats, rip-off bosses and greedy bankers. Our political editor Gary Gibbon reports now from Manchester.
Now, everyone, please give a warm and riotous Manchester welcome to a man who has dedicated his life to giving a toss about other people, Jeremy Corbyn.
Not quite the intro his team would have scripted, but Jeremy Corbyn was propelled to the leadership of his party in reaction to on-message, rigidly drilled politics. Jeremy Corbyn told supporters Theresa May was playing at caring about ordinary workers and trying to own the issue of Brexit.
Just in case their talk of fairness doesn't wash, they have another card to play. That this election is all about Brexit and who can play at being toughest with Brussels. Labour will not allow the Tories to put their party interests ahead of the real national interest, the interests of the people of this country.
Jeremy Corbyn attacked wealthy, exploitative bosses and said Labour was coming for them.
When Labour wins, there'll be a reckoning for those who thought they could get away with asset stripping our industry, crashing our economy through their greed and ripping off workers and consumers. We have 4 weeks to ruin their party. We have 4 weeks to have a chance to take our wealth back.
They lapped it up. But some on the left think Jeremy Corbyn's campaign is a bit of a cut-and-paste job from Ed Miliband's 2 years ago.
Britain can be better. The system is rigged in favour of the rich.
All your rhetoric sounded revolutionary when you stood as Labour leader, but All the policies we've heard so far sound incredibly familiar from 2015 in Ed Miliband.
Oh, no. We're going to transform the way our economy works. That's the whole point behind what I was saying this morning. The levels of low pay in Britain, 6 million earning less than the living wage, 1 million on 0 hours contracts, many young people unable to get jobs anywhere near their skill levels.
But I could tick off all those policies and find variations, if not identikits, in the 2015 manifesto. Is it that you haven't had time because of the ambush of a sudden election to think up new policies, or are you hiding some which will be actually transformatory, but which you think might frighten the voters?
Look, you're asking for the manifesto. It's next week.
Mr Corbyn's team say that will unveil brand new, bold policies. They say changes to workers' rights already announced will transform the labour market, and other more familiar policies show a direction of travel a Labour government would go in. How will it feel like a day of reckoning for a greedy banker the day you come in?
A banker should be investing in the future of our economy. I would invite them to look at their investment strategy. Are they supporting small businesses? Are they supporting...
Doesn't sound like you're not telling me how it will feel like a day of reckoning.
Those that are hiding their profits away in tax havens, those that are running a whole strategy of tax evasion or tax avoidance, we're going to change that.
Jeremy Corbyn acknowledged that the local elections had knocked the party back. They may love him, they know that's not universal.
When you describe the policies, people are very positive.
And then you mention him and it goes down a bit.
Well, yeah, but then when you ask them what specifically they don't like, they don't really have an answer. All they have is media perception that there is something inadequate about him.
He gets a reaction favourable in some areas, unfavourable in others, if I'm honest about it. But again, it's a media frenzy and attacks from the Tories on Jeremy Corbyn that's made him toxic.
Security isn't so rigid on this campaign, message control not always so tight either. In one interview, the Labour leader was reported to have left open the possibility of Britain staying in the EU. A misunderstanding, his team said, but when you're trying to change the topic from Brexit, not a helpful one. Gary Gibbon, Channel 4 News, Salford.